What's up guys, Kyle here again, and welcome to the very first episode of KB GEARCAST. This is going to be a weekly, long-form podcast-style episode where I bring on guests who are builders in the guitar industry, musicians, or fellow YouTubers, and talk about basically their history in guitar gear, what led them to where they are now, and what inspires them to do what they do on a daily basis regarding their position in the industry. The video podcast episodes will be up on my YouTube channel every week, but I will also be posting the audio on Spotify, Apple Music, basically all major streaming platforms thanks to my friends at DistroKid. Down in the description of the video, I will put my VIP DistroKid link where you will get a 7% discount if you sign up using that link. My very first guest in this series is David Szabados. David is a blogger, and he's also the owner of LegendaryTones.com, which is a site dedicated to guitar tone that's been around for over 20 years. David, much like myself, has a huge passion for guitar tone, diving deep into the history of amps, pedals, all sorts of things to find out how things have changed over the years and what makes them tick. David has collaborated with a number of big names in the industry, including Mike Soldano, Andy Marshall of THD, and Robert Keeley of Keeley Electronics, to develop some unique products and bring his visions to life. The most recent offering from Legendary Tones is the HotMod V2 Evo. Now, you guys have seen the original HotMod V2 on my channel. I demoed it a while back, and in my opinion, that HotMod is going to change the 2203, 2204 for a lot of owners who want to own or hot rod their vintage Marshalls, but don't want to change the circuit and don't have access to a tech. I really think that it's a great product, and David has been nothing but helpful and friendly to me since I started my YouTube channel. So, it is my honor to introduce you guys to David Szabados. Hope you guys enjoy. All right, welcome, David. Thank you for doing this with me. I really appreciate it, man.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah. And why don't you go ahead and give us a quick little introduction?
Well, I'm David Szabados. I'm the owner and founder of Legendary Tones. So Legendary Tones started out as a blog back in about 2001, which was just about guitar tone. You know, there wasn't that much information out there at the time. And I had learned a lot of information from other folks that had mentored me, whether they were techs, other musicians. I just felt, let me start talking about tone. And from there, I went and did some things with Robert Keeley, which we can talk about later. And now I've got my product, the HotMod V2 and then the Lynch Mod. So
awesome. Yeah, so far, I've been a big fan of the HotMod. Obviously, we've been talking back and forth about that a lot. And you sent me the Evo to try out, so I appreciate it. In my opinion, that thing kind of revolutionizes, classic 800s in a way that at this point in history, or at this point in time, I guess, if you have an unbastardized 2203 JMP or even the JCM 800 model, you kind of want to leave it that way. You don't really want to mod it at this point because there's not that many floating around that are in original condition. So to be able to get the hot rod and Marshall tone out of that same amp and actually use it, if that's what you're going for, somebody like me, without having to actually modify the amp and do any sort of permanent modification, I mean, you can't beat that. And the fact that it sounds fantastic, I'm not doing a commercial for you or anything here, I promise. Everybody that I've talked to about it so far says that it's awesome. My friend Drew bought one and he was telling me all about it after I recommended it to him. So I really think that especially with the Evo, with you being able to kind of increase production and stuff, that thing's going to be really popular here in the near future for 800 owners. So you did a good job on that thing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's there's different approaches you can take to this thing, right? A lot of people use a pedal, kind of hit the front end, and certainly nothing wrong with that. And I still do that as well. And I know in your type of music, you will use the HotMod as well as a pedal in the front.
Yep.
Push it even further. It's kind of a unique approach, though, when you put the HotMod in, because what you're doing is there's a circuit inside called the cathode follower inside the amp, and we're basically layering a gain stage, which is pure tube, on top of that cathode follower. So the result is, I guess if you compare between hitting the front end, when you hit the front end with the pedal, you're kind of compressing the entire signal chain. And so you're going to get a lot of distortion, a lot of gain, which is great, but it's a more compressed kind of feel. And with the HotMod, it's a little bit different because you're just putting it into that gain stage, so you get a little bit more note articulation. So it's just a different way to do it, and I found it was a lot of fun. And And, I'm enjoying it and definitely love seeing the positive response. I mean, I worked on this for about 2.5 years with my co-designers, Mike Soldano being one, and then Andy Marshall of THD Electronics being the other, and just tweaking it and, modernizing it so you can get the, expand the capability of your old Marshall amp.
Right. And from what I heard, I've never played the original Soldano ones, but seemed to be kind of mixed reviews on it as far as how it affected the tone once you put it into that spot. So, I'm not super
I've actually,
with it, but sorry.
I've got one here. So this is what it looks like. It uses kind of an oddball tube called a 6K11 or a 6CA10. And it's a pretty cool design. You have to remember that these came out in the late 80s. So the tone, the way that it's dialed in is a little bit different. It's basically like a light switch as far as the gain. So it's, with the HotMod Evo, when you hit the gain switch up, it's got a lot of compression. This one probably has about 5% more in total gain.
Oh, wow.
But it's just, you use the preamp control and right away it's super compressed. And then there's also a lot of bass that's dialed in. So I think for modern kinds of sounds, it's probably going to be too tubby, too boomy on the low end.
Mm-hmm.
The only other issue besides the tubes being, this is a GE Compactron tube, which was an oddball tube just designed for other sorts of circuits. It tends to be a little bit noisy, and they tend to be microphonic and not very long lasting. So, the whole genesis of the HotMod V2 was, can I do something, but let's use 12AX7s instead. And so I first copied the design, just straight through. And then from there it was like, okay, now we need to do some tweaking. It's like, it's way too much, way too soon.
Yeah.
It's still a little bit noisy, still bassy. And then that's when I, worked both with Mike and Andy to kind of work on that design and make those particular tweaks. And, like I said, it took a lot of time to go back and forth. I'm pretty picky with my Marshall tones. I've been playing Marshall since, I was 19 years old. I still have my very first amp too.
Oh, wow. Really? Which one is that?
Yeah, that's a 76 JMP. So it was the first year of the 100-watt 2203. So it's a really cool design because it kind of looks like the old school Marshall.
Yeah.
With a small logo and the gold piping, but it's a master volume rather than a non-master.
Okay.
So, and they only did that for a year. The 50-watt version of those they introduced in 1975, but those didn't have the cascaded preamp, and they had some other issues. So Marshall was still figuring it out back then.
Okay, gotcha. I had another question, but it completely escaped my mind from, the tube in the Soldano HotMod. That, from what I understand, was, even at the time, was kind of hard to get, which was one of the reasons that it wasn't, super popular, and he wasn't able to pump out a lot of them.
Yeah, that was true. And that was an issue. They were hard to get. And then the other thing too was the compatibility with different amps. You've seen the Evo where on some of them I have to reverse wire the triodes. The type of HotMod that you would use in a reissue 2203 is different than the original. And even some of the other amps that it works with, like the pre-Infinium version of the Bugera, it'll work in that, but that it will also be reverse wired.
Okay.
So it makes it definitely more complicated. You have to research all these amps, look at schematics, see what works. And I do have people that reach out all the time. Will it work in my Fender Twin? Will it work in my Vox AC30?
Right.
And I ended up having to do a separate web page just to list all that stuff. And, the answer is technically it will work in many of those amps as well, but the circuit isn't tuned for it. So my whole thing is I'd rather sell fewer of these, but get a really good result because it's tuned for that particular Marshall, rather than just trying to say, oh yeah, it'll work in this, just go ahead and buy it.
Yeah.
Because if you put in a Fender Twin, it's going to add that gain stage, but it's not going to sound good in the Fender Twin.
Right. And that's cool that you're honest with people, because a lot of people would just be like, yeah, sure, go ahead and buy it. You may not love it, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'd rather have good reviews overall and sell fewer for sure.
Yeah, understandable. Plus, then you don't get the, angry customer response of,
yeah, what the hell?
Right, exactly. Yeah. So I know I've already had to send a bunch of people to you, and I apologize because I keep forgetting to just link that webpage. But especially even in the last couple of days, that video for some reason has like gained some traction because it's gotten a bunch of comments, and people are asking me again, does it work in a 5150? Does it work in a dual rectifier?
Yeah.
And you just got to kind of laugh. It's like, why would you possibly want more gain stages out of either of those amps? But
I get those questions every day. I was, even just before we got online here, I got an email from someone, will it work in my 6505? And I'm like, man, I've got a 5150 EVH, and that's got all the gain you can want and then some.
Right.
I mean, but
that's,
you just kindly respond, no, sorry, it doesn't work. Here's the compatibility list for future reference. And you go from there.
Right, yeah. Go on about your day as they're disappointed that they can't get a 6 gain stage in their 5150. But no, yeah, that's one of the things, and I could see it. I mean, we were just discussing this the other day when I was using my Evo, how there were just so many. Marshall was just never consistent in the way that they designed amps, and I don't really know about circuits anyway, so I'm not going to pretend that I do, but I do know when I was reading about them when I was first getting into gear that it was like no 2 years of a JCM 800 or a 2203 were the same. It's every year they either changed the design on purpose or they just started doing things differently due to component values and stuff like that. So that's definitely an obstacle that you got to deal with all the time, I'm sure.
Yeah, although, it's kind of funny. It's like I've been at this tone chasing thing and I really enjoy it. And I've been, for decades now. And coming out with this product has been super educational for me.
I'm sure.
Because it's forced me to go into, if someone, for example, if there's a particular noise that they hear in their amp, I have to kind of research, like, why is that happening? And I did learn an interesting thing recently, that the very earliest JMPs did not use shielded wire on one particular pin on the V1 socket. So what will happen is if you add gain inside the amp, whether you're modifying it with that or with the HotMod, it will oscillate a little bit when you have the preamp gain at about 6 or above. Now, Marshall corrected that but from the factory in about mid 78, early 79. But it's interesting because it's, these are the things you learn as you kind of go through it. So fortunately, that's an easy update. And that's one of those things I think a lot of people should do, whether they use the HotMod or not, because that's, any sort of noise or sensitivity pickup, where, regardless of where you're playing live, you don't want to pick up noise or additional microphonics or have that sort of issue. So I recently updated my website and shared that information about that particular thing on the early JMP. So, but it's been fun. I like that kind of stuff. It's like I'm getting a little bit of a taste of the Marshall history,
right, firsthand, as opposed to just researching it and kind of reading about it. Yeah. So I mean,
many years ago, I did a buyer's guide on early Marshalls that went from the Plexis to the up to the JCM 2000. And the early Plexi stuff, that was just based on looking at stuff, trying to determine what's authentic and what isn't, because there is a little bit of a cottage industry where there's some fake older Marshalls, especially when they're worth so much money, or they use parts from other amps and kind of slash it together. So that's what that article is really about, kind of looking for that. And then later on, as we go into the JMPs and JCM 800s, it's more about the circuit differences, but at a really high level, not at a sort of nerd geeky level that I kind of got to, like with the shielded wiring kind of thing.
Yeah.
But that article, which has been posted for well over 10 years, tons and tons of views and a lot of really positive response. So Legendary Tone still continues as a blog and information site. I don't write as much as I did in the past, just because I'm so busy. But I do plan to, what I learn, I can share and help out folks. I'm going to continue to do that for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. Not many people would be, passionate enough, one, but willing to compile it all into a list like that and put it out just for people to have. So I know I definitely stumbled across that site a couple times when looking into the older Marshall stuff. So I mean, it's one of the top things that comes up when you really start digging into like the history of Marshall amps. So that says something. You put together a good list, you put together all the right information, it seems, and it's cool that continues, to this day. So
my whole point was to try to do some evergreen type of content, because I knew that I wouldn't be able to keep up, writing stuff all the time.
Right.
So I wanted stuff that could just be a good reference. And, one of my first articles, because people my age and around my age were really into the Eddie Van Halen sound.
Of course, yeah.
So the first article was really, it was really kind of a research paper almost, because I was compiling information. I was actually even citing the other articles that referenced the early Van Halen sound, and kind of did a whole collection of what was involved with getting that tone, etc. And that's another article that's on the site that gets referenced a lot. And for whatever reason, Eddie changed everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jimi Hendrix in the 60s and Van Halen in the 70s, and we still can listen to that guitar sound. And, to us, it's just like it can still give you chills.
Absolutely. Yeah, honestly, he's myself as a musical fan. I'm not a huge Van Halen fan. I don't dislike them, but obviously it's a little bit different era and a little bit different style from the stuff. I absolutely appreciate his guitar playing, but you listen to those early Van Halen records, and it's, as a younger kid, I would never know, because you don't really know until somebody puts it into context how big of a deal that tone was. I was born in '88, so that all that had, the craze over his guitar tone initially had already happened, come and gone, before I was even born. So listening, 1984 was actually one of the first CDs I got, so that was good parenting on my parents' part. They let me get Back in Black and 1984 when I think I was like 6 or 7 years old, but they were big fans of both bands, so I guess it makes sense. But listening to it, there's something special about it, even at a young age. But even the guitar tone, now it doesn't seem that crazy unless you put it in the context of the time. And in the context of the time, it was insane, and there was a reason that everybody was losing their minds over it, and he became this guitar hero overnight. So yeah, he did a lot of innovation as far as gear, not only guitar playing, but for my perspective, gear. I have pretty much every 5150 related amp that's out there, and I love him to death. So yeah, he's responsible for a lot of modern guitar tones and play style. So it's a big deal.
Yeah, and I would say Mike Soldano really started it with his SLO.
Yeah.
Eddie, as you know, was using his stuff for a bit before going on to PV officially, and there are definitely a lot of similarities between the two circuits. The EVH stuff definitely is higher gain, but it definitely borrows some of that SLO.
Oh yeah,
kind of thing, and that's one of my all-time favorite amps. Actually, I'm a Marshall guy through and through, but the SLO just has some magic to it, and just a lot of fun to play. It's just great. I love them. I love a lot of amps, so that's probably not saying much.
Well, yeah, I can honestly relate to you there. The SLO is actually one I've never gotten to play. And from what I understand, Mike kind of pulled, that circuit from like a 2203 and then did his own things to it, essentially.
Yeah, there's definitely there's a Marshall-esque feel in there, but of course he's using the output tubes that kind of come from a Fender style of the house.
Right.
And I talked to Mike a lot about this, and I did an interview with him, years back as well. And his whole thing was he wanted an amp that could deliver the goods at low volume and high volume. So he used really high quality audiophile grade and very expensive transformers, but particularly the output transformer, which is very clean. So it doesn't color the sound like, if you turn up in old Marshall or even some of the older Fenders and Tweeds, a lot of the magic that you're hearing, because you're cranking up, of course the speakers are breaking up, so that's a factor, but the output transformer is like the last piece of signal before it goes to the speakers.
Right.
And there's saturation that happens in the output transformer when you crank up an amp. And that's what changes the tone also. And in an old Marshall and an old Fender, there's some magic that happens when you crank it up. And that's why some people, they still want to use an attenuator to try to tame it, because none of us could play these things full up. I mean, unless we're, playing a stadium, which is, not happening right now or yet.
Right.
But,
and even then, they'll just mic you up and tell you to turn it down. So.
Yeah, exactly. Or, you try to put a shield in front or whatever.
Right.
But, Mike with his SLO and that output transformer, the whole thing was to keep it really clean and keep it tight at whatever volume. So it's pretty consistent. When you turn it up, you'll get a little bit of the low end that kind of comes in from the output tube, the kind of sag and the bottom end kind of girth. But other than that, it's just a really responsive amp. And so definitely, if you get a chance, find one, check one out.
Oh yeah, I'm on the hunt always. I've had a couple come by me not that long ago at reasonable prices, but I've got too many expensive ones sitting behind me now so I got to get rid of a couple before I pick something like that up. But one of the
maybe a loan of one, because I know that the original ones are like $5,000 now, and and the new ones for sale are like $4 something. So
right, yeah, they're definitely no cheap date. It seems like I've seen a couple of the newer ones used, which is honestly I'm kind of more interested in the newer one anyways, because it's got the depth mod built into it, which is something that I would want anyways. Obviously, I want to try one of the old ones just to experience that as well. Just I like to try everything, you know what I mean, and just to play it, just to say that I had that experience. That's something that's important to me as somebody who just loves gear. But I'm steadily on the hunt, so hopefully I can track something down. But one of the things that I've always heard about SLOs, and it's funny that you say he wanted to create an amp that sounded good at all volumes, not the same, but sounded good at all volumes. Everybody says that the magic of that amp is in the transformers, and once you start really pushing it. So I guess, what do you have to say to that as somebody who actually understands?
When I talk to Mike and understanding the way that the transformer is done, it's like it's a very heavy duty over spec. So I think the magic that people are referring to is really the magic in the output tubes.
Yeah.
Because those are going to compress. And there's probably speaker interaction too, depending on which speaker you're playing through. So I'm just saying that particular amp, more of the magic is coming through that, and the transformer is just set very clean. Another amp that does a similar type of thing is the Hiwatt. The old original Hiwatts were built like mil spec. They are super, super clean, super loud, and they're built like tanks. But the transformers are very high quality, audio grade style. They're not the type that are going to saturate or provide that. So, an old Fender is a really good example of one where you get a lot of the transformer distortion and overload because of the, it's almost like Leo Fender wanted a cheaper part just to save, cost, but then there's some magic in that cheaper part.
Right.
And to some extent, Marshall the same way,
happy
accident. It's always, there's always a cost that you have to, whether it was in the 60s or now, people go, they're not built like they're used to and all that. But, I don't buy into that. People were always cost conscious at the time. And there's definitely some stuff in the past that was better, but there's some stuff now that's amazing.
Right.
And just talking about guitars, for example, guitars, back when I was young and starting out, an entry-level guitar played like garbage. They had really bad action. They weren't set up. They were just difficult to play. And it's really frustrating when you're a new guitar player because, the typical parent that is buying you a guitar because you're just a kid is going to have the attitude of, well, let's buy him something cheap just to make sure that he likes it first.
Right.
And then if he doesn't like it, or if he gets better, then we'll talk about a better instrument. The thing is, if you've got a guitar that just doesn't play well, doesn't sound good, it's hard to play, the action is terrible, it doesn't intonate. It can make your playing experience a lot more frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
But fast forward to now, things are done on CNC machines, they're precision made. So even those entry level guitars are a lot better just right out of the box. And, maybe just upgrade the electronics later on. But, the Squire of today is a lot better than the Squire of yesterday. Except some of the Japanese stuff.
I was just going to say, somebody who has a Japanese Squire is going to be yelling at you through their screen.
No, that's actually, those were really well done. I shouldn't use Squire as an example. But
I think it's a
trust me, there was a lot more junky guitars back then.
Yeah.
And the entry level now is so much better. And then amps also.
Absolutely.
My first amp was a solid state Honor with no distortion on it, just had reverb and a single 12-inch, and you had to get your distortion box. And my first one was a Proco Rat, and it sounded okay, but it wasn't that great. And what kind of cracks me up is the Proco Rat, which I still have. I don't use it. Yeah. It's so revered, and they're actually expensive.
Oh, very, very.
So pedals like that, or the Boss DS1. I mean, the DS1 is kind of cool, but it's it's nothing. I mean, there's so many better options out there today.
Right.
So many people are just doing such great circuitry. It's kind of like a golden age of gear.
Yeah.
And had I been starting to play now versus in the early 80s, it would have just my head would be just exploding with all the cool stuff that's out there.
Right, exactly. There's so many affordable options, and I mean,
and it's affordable. Yeah.
Yeah, look at Jet City, for example. They're not the best amps in the world, but they sound really good. And you're talking, you can get a 50-watt all-tube amp with, kind of a Soldano circuit in it for $500 brand new, or at least they were. I don't know what they are now, because I think the company kind of changed hands and something's different. But anyways, I mean, that or the Bugera, even though those are clones of PVs, those are $500 tube amps that sound just fine. Those options just weren't there, even 15, 20 years ago. So yeah, the availability of cheap gear that is great is insane right now.
Yeah, and the high gain stuff that was really, it really wasn't available in the 80s. You had a Marshall, you sent it to Lee Jackson or Jose or any of these guys that were doing all these mods. And, so it was, Mesa was out there, but Mesa did its own thing. And there was kind of a love-hate with the Mark series. They were... I have a Mark III. I think it's great. I had Mike B do the plus mod to it. It's a lot of fun. But it's really touchy in terms of the settings, so if you go gig with it, stuff is going to change. You're like, oh, where was that exact setting that I had on the EQ?
Right.
Because you got to have the graphic EQ going on that thing.
Yep.
To me, a Mark is just not worth it, or just not the tone I go for unless it's got the graphic EQ.
That's what everybody says. Yep.
So, because you got to turn down the bass, because the bass control on those tend to get really flubby really fast. So you turn into 0 to 2, and then you turn up the graphic, because that would be after the tone stack. So there wasn't really a lot out there, and of course that was the day and age of the rack gear too. People were doing stuff in the rack, and they had their refrigerators, and I was really, my whole journey for guitar playing after I went, after I was able to step up from a Honor was, okay, let me look into this rack stuff, because that's got to be the best, because it's so sophisticated. And you get all this stuff, and, honestly, what started me on this Marshall path is I had this rack gear, I had the Quadriverb, ADA MP1, all this stuff going on, and it sounded decent, it sounded good. I met someone who was a local musician, fantastic guitar player, who was just using a JMP 2203 Marshall cabinets, and he had an old Ibanez, not a tube screamer, but an EQ box as a boost for solos. And I heard that band play, and I was like, holy wow, his tone blew me away. And I'm like,
right.
I mean, he was older than me. And I'm like, I thought Marshall was his dinosaur gear. Why does he sound so good? And he was my first mentor that kind of took me on the path of Marshalls and tone and,
oh, that's awesome.
And different pickups and all that. And, it just started from there kind of in the late 80s, right around when you were born.
So you probably heard that amp and then put all your rack gear up for sale the next day to try and fund a Marshall. Well, exactly. Back then they were really cheap on the used market, weren't they? Because people were kind of like over them at the time.
Oh yeah, I mean a JCM 800 was nothing desirable, and I think used they were going for about $300 or something like that.
That's
JMPs, say $350, $400. I should have bought a lot of plexis back then, but I didn't know.
Yeah, you don't.
And actually, plexis were always just a more difficult animal. We didn't have the attenuator options like we do now.
Right. Would you have the Marshall? What's the Marshall one? The brake?
Yeah, the power brake, which I don't think really sounds that good. There's a modification that you can do that makes it sound better, but I didn't know about that at the time.
Okay.
I think those came out more in the mid 90s or so, thereabouts. But yeah, playing in an old super lead, you had to either mod it or and I didn't know people that did that, and it just seemed to make a lot more sense. Just a 2203 or 2204 circuit was a lot more player friendly.
Yeah,
and they're great amps, and for playing clubs and perfect.
Do you have any idea? I mean, I guess I've never really looked into it, but do you know why Marshall went to the master volume design? Is it because more people were kind of getting into playing guitar and buying those amps for themselves that weren't playing stadiums, and they wanted to make it obtainable?
Absolutely. Okay. I mean, it's just to make it more player friendly.
Yeah, that makes sense. I figured as much, but I guess I never really looked into that portion of it.
Yeah, the funny thing about Marshall, if you look back in their history, they even have some ads before the master volume. They would actually boast that their amps were the cleanest power amps, like low distortion.
Whoops.
For a little while. So there's some ads from, I think, maybe the late 60s where they're talking about that. And of course, nobody wanted them for clean. So I don't know what their marketing department was thinking of at the time.
Right.
That's clean power. I'll have to dig up that ad and see where I can see it. I'm sure there's one on the web. But,
yeah, I'd be curious to see it.
When
you put or started putting all the legendary tone stuff together for the blog, that was early 2000s, you said?
Yeah, it was somewhere midway 2000, or it might have been early 2001. I don't recall.
So obviously you have kind of like a personal connection to the whole Marshall lineage and everything, but when did they kind of start to gain popularity again? Because I know for a long time they were viewed as like these undesirable amps that nobody wanted, and then all of a sudden everybody wanted them again.
Yeah, I think to me, I look back at their history. I mean, they've certainly always been successful throughout their lineage and have grown. But I think where they started getting a bad rap was with the JCM 900 series, and not all of them, mind you. The early ones, the Model 2500 and the SLX, whichever designation that one was. Those were all pure tube. Mm-hmm. They started coming out with the dual reverb model. And I remember playing one. I was really excited at first because I was like, it's got 2 channels, it's got reverb.
Right.
There was a JCM 800 that also had that, but it had a bleed over problem. And even the later ones would sort of bleed over some of the clean into the distortion. And, they were still good, but not perfect. And so I think the JCM 900 for me was kind of I think it was the Model 4500 or that was, it's like, wow, this is just, it's kind of brittle. It doesn't have the fullness. And later on, I realized why. I mean, I was looking at the circuitry of it. There's a lot of solid state in that amp, a lot of solid state.
Right.
Mixed in with the particular tubes and gain stages. Now, Marshall had experimented with diodes in the Jubilee series, mm-hmm. right? And it's in some of their other amps, and they have their own kind of sound, and some people like them and some people don't. Some people go, oh, it's too buzzy. I dig them. I think they're pretty cool. You know, it's a different flavor, and you know, it's like ice cream. You don't have to just like vanilla or chocolate. You can like a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
But the 900 series really went down this path of just, you know, the first gain stage, I think, in its entirety was a solid state gain stage, then pushing into a tube. And for whatever reason, they didn't sound that good. The other issue that they had at the time in the 90s was the tube quality. The brand new tubes that were being made were suffering.
Yeah.
And E4s in particular had a lot of problems. So there was a time where the Marshall switched to 6L6,
mm-hmm.
And that kind of gets away from the core sound. But I still think they sold a lot. You know, I just, to me, that was their dark period.
Right.
And then they came back with the 2000s, and to me, they corrected a lot of it. And I think a lot of those, the DSL 2000 in particular, is one of my favorites. I think that's a really nice amp that's got some good clean. Oh, there you go.
Yep.
Yeah, I've got one myself. I haven't played it for a while. I should turn it on.
Oh man, you definitely should. I love those amps.
Yeah, it's so I think they got back on track with that one for sure.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. There's still a lot of, you know, right when I started my YouTube channel, I had this little thing called bullshooting, which was basically just me talking to the camera, trying to figure out ways to make content, I guess. But
yeah,
one of the things I talked about was the JCM 2000 and even some of the 900s, and how they have a bad reputation. Even the 2000 it's like finally starting to like gain a good reputation, it seems. I noticed when I posted my video of my JCM 2000, there was a lot of positive comments on the amp itself. But I remember 10 years ago when I had a 5150 and I was looking at JCM 2000s as like a Marshall high gain derivative, or not derivative, but just an option. I would go on the forums and people were just crapping all over them. You know, you go on the Marshall forums and it was like nobody had anything good to say. They're thin, they're buzzy, and so I just stayed away from them because I read that and took it. You know, I'd never played it. I don't know. So yeah, they had a bad reputation for a long time, it seems, and they're finally kind of starting to come into their own with a good reputation. I think that's great because I think they're a nice in between of the JVM and the 800 or 2203, where you can still get some nice full lush like just breakup type tones out of the green channel, but then you can also get the very compressed high gain stuff on the lead channel. So yeah, I think that amp's fantastic personally. But yeah, the 900, I think we talked a little bit about this before, but I think the dual reverb is better than people give it credit for. But it's still not going to be an amp that I'm going to go after with all the options out there. You know what I mean? They can, like, I feel like pretty much any amp can sound good in the hands of the right person. You know, the player and their ear, but all those things come into play for sure. But yeah, the 900 is really where it seems like Marshall started to kill their own reputation. And then I think the JCM 2000 was kind of plagued with issues. They had the bias drift issue and the output jack issue for like the first 6-7 years of production before they finally fixed it on the later models. Yeah. It's interesting because we tend to have this like I mentioned earlier, where it's like, oh, the stuff they were making in the past was so much better, and you could have had the same exact discussion in the JCM 800 time. Right.
You know, like, oh, the early JMPs were so much better than these JCM 800s. The 800s are too bright. They don't have any, this or that. And, when the master volumes came out, oh, the non-masters are so much better than the master volumes. The master volumes are so buzzy. And it just, 10 years from now, we can have the same conversation and it'll probably be, maybe the JCM 900 will be revered because that's a particular sound that was unique, and people now want that sound. You can make the same talk about like fuzz pedals. I'm not really a fuzz pedal guy, but some people love those things, and I've written about them, and I think they're interesting colors. But you listen to the opening riff of Satisfaction, by Rolling Stones, and some people just love that fuzz sound. But most people, or a lot of guitar players, I don't want to sound like that. It's just like
it sounds like something's wrong with the guitar.
Yeah, or something's broken.
Right.
So everything, whether it's a big muff, I mean, there's a lot of people that love that particular pedal. That's really, does its own thing. And, tube screamers are another area. And a lot of people also love to split hairs, especially online. And I'm guilty of this too, where it's like,
I was going to say, didn't you write up something on tube screamers as well?
Oh, I've written up many things on tube screamers. And because one of the things I did notice is that there is a difference between the old ones, the old original ones, versus the new ones. So one of the things I did is I had another piece of electronics and it had the right diodes, and I was able to find a new old stock chip. And I started swapping the parts and putting the old parts into the new tube screamer. And then after each thing that I would do, I would kind of measure it and listen and go, okay, well, how much closer is it now to the old tube screamer? After changing the op amp chip, getting the original JRC, the clipping diodes, they've got to be the original type, and then putting those in, and then changing the caps. And I found after a while that, if you do change out those parts, you can get it just like the original.
Yeah.
So there definitely is some truth in that sort of mojo of the tube screamer lore. The thing is, what most people use a tube screamer for is as a boost.
Right.
Right. And as a boost, and to cut, to cut some of the low end and tighten up the sound. So in that application, it doesn't matter as much.
Right.
Personally, but I think once you add in more of the overdrive, and if you use it as an overdrive, that's when you can really start to split those hairs and go, well, this one has a little bit of an extra nuance at top end, and it's a little bit bright and crunchy, and this one has a little bit of that in this. And people love to do that on the web, and guilty as charged.
Well, I mean, look at the market right now. Like, I think you and I were talking about product saturation when we were talking about the HotMod, and you're like, I could come out with a overdrive or tube screamer pedal if I wanted, but look how many there are right now.
Yeah. It just doesn't interest me. But what surprises me is that people are still buying them. Like, doesn't everyone already have a tube screamer or tube screamer variant?
It's almost like one of those standard pieces of gear you have to have, though.
Yeah. And I've collected them now. I've got 3 original ones, but they all have different chips.
Okay.
So they're all a little bit different.
What's like the time difference on that, as them being original but different chips?
Actually, a lot of the same years. So I have 2 that are original 1980.
Okay.
But one has the Malaysian chip, and then the other has the JRC 4558D. And other than that, they're identical. But they do have their nuanced sort of difference. I think the Malaysian chip has a little bit more compression, is what I'm hearing. That said, I haven't played through hundreds of them, so that variance could well be, maybe there's some drift in one of the resistors, like maybe a 100K resistor drifted down to an 80, or now it's a 110. Right. So that's going to change the sound too. So you never quite know, and that's kind of part of the fun, I think, too. Just to, for me, I like them just because it's historical, and it's, something that was around and made when I was just a kid, and so it's kind of fun to have. It's like a lot of people that love to have their birthday year guitar. I was born in 72, so I've got a 1972 Strat. Is it a great guitar? No. Not really.
But it's your birthday year. Yeah, exactly.
But it's my birthday year, and there's a coolness factor with that. And I just kind of like, I could still play it, and it sounds good. I don't really play a lot of single coil guitars a lot. The ones that I do are with the stacked coil.
Okay.
The cover band thing that I'm doing now, I have to kind of span all sorts of different styles. And so I don't like the 60 cycle hum that you get out of a single coil pickup. So
yeah, they can be pretty noisy.
Some of those DiMarzio area pickups are really good, and those type of things.
Yeah.
I love the look, but I just got to have a less noise in my signal.
Right. Have you ever tried the noiseless pickups? I don't know anything about single coil pickups. I'm going to be completely honest because I never play them. But I know Lace has a bunch of noiseless ones, but I don't know how they sound, and Fender has their own noiseless.
My very first guitar that that I bought for myself brand new, and I was very proud of it, was a 1995 Strat Plus. And that was a USA-made guitar that came with lace sensors stock, and it came with the roller nut, and also locking tuners and a few other cool kind of features. And the idea of the lace sensors, the gold ones, was to sound like a classic Strat. And it really doesn't. It has its own thing.
Yeah.
I think some of the stacked coil, single coil, technically they're not really single coil, but they're stacked coil pickups now, they can get them pretty close to the sort of classic original sound of the early pickups, if that's kind of your thing.
Gotcha.
But I'm not really a blues type player. I mean, I'm kind of in the rock and roll realm, but when I do the cover band thing, I'm doing some rock stuff, I'm doing funk stuff, I'm doing some contemporary pop, just all across the range, and a little bit of blues. There's a blues standard that we play at some places, depending.
Yeah.
All depends on the audience and where you play. But.
Right. I mean, you can pull all that off with a humbucker, whereas you're not going to be able to pull all that off as well with a single coil for sure. So.
Yeah, and what I like about the stacked coils is, if you use a Les Paul or something with a humbucker, it's got a really fat tone, which sounds great for rock and blues and a lot of that. But I do a lot of stuff where it's like sort of that funk sound, and it's got to be thinner. Mm-hmm. And I know that they've got the coil tapping options, but I love the Strat sound for that sort of thing.
Oh, so. Yeah. It's not the same. Coil tapping's cool, but you also get the noise with that, and then you don't get as good of a sound. So you're kind of cheating yourself two ways.
Yeah.
But yeah, for sure. One of the things that I was going to touch back on is the history of things. Like, why do you think that is? What draws you to the history of gear? Because obviously you've spent a lot of time researching and compiling things just for the love of knowing the history of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I kind of look back, I mean, even in childhood, I used to love to take things apart and see how they work and then put them back together. So there's that love. So that sort of formed my love of electronics, mm-hmm. and sort of building things. And then as far as the history of, why I like things back in that time, I don't know. But I'm the same way with like cars. Like I love old classic cars and things, and I like them the way that they were supposed to be back in the day. Like I'm not really into cars that are, you take it and hot rod it and change it and you put like modern seats into an old car. I mean, some people like that, and it's cool. I would rather get into an old car and like you're going back into a time machine. It's like that's what it was back in 1969.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Well, that's really how it is. If you get into an unmodified car like that from those times, it's like you're kind of stepping into a different world. Especially with cars today, it's like it's night and day. You sit in those old bench seats and you got all this room around you.
Yeah, I mean, and it's noisy, and then the steering is tight. It's not really comfortable, but it's fun. It's just it's kind of cool in its own way, and for whatever reason, with amplifiers and and guitars, I do love the vintage stuff, and the thing with the HotMod again, kind of going back to that, was I love the idea of being able to preserve stuff, and if I can come up with a solution that'll help someone without necessarily needing to mod or cut open their amp, or maybe they've already got it modded and they don't want to mod it more. Here's something for them. And I'm not necessarily going to say I'm anti-mod. Someone owns their amp, they're free to do with whatever they want to do to it. I mean, there might be someone out there that does these killer mods and, send out your amp, and, there's enough out there for all of us. And, if you look at the early JCM 900, like the SLX, I mean, that is a modded Marshall with an extra gain stage. Mm-hmm. Of an 800 essentially. Mm-hmm. And some people love taking the HotMod and putting in that one too and adding additional gain stage.
As soon as you told me that it worked in the SLX, I'm like, I got to find another SLX just to see how it sounds, because I always love that amp. I bought and sold the same exact one 3 times. Like I would sell it, and then the buyer would be over it after like a few months, and I'd be like, yeah, I want that thing back. And then I'd get it, and then I'd sell it on for the next thing. This is back when I didn't have the ability to stack amps on top of amps. So it was kind of like, but yeah, I always remember really liking how that amp sounded. But for my ear at the time, I wanted a little bit more gain than it had, even with the boost in front. But now I think I've kind of dialed things back a bit. So anyways, I just thought it would be cool to kind of put the HotMod in there. That way you don't have to turn the gain up all the way, because you turn the preamp gain up in those and they start to get fat, like too fat, a little loose. So I'm like, oh man, the HotMod would be perfect to drop in there, dial the gain back a little bit, hit the front end, and that would be a perfect thrash amp. So
yeah, and then hit the bass cut on the Evo, right, to be able to bring down the
it would,
the bass.
I'm sure it would sound fantastic. So, but now they're like $1,000. I used to buy and sell them for $500-600, and they were fairly easy to do that with. And the price, even on the high gain dual reverb, the prices on those, you used to be able to buy those for like $400 or $500. Nobody wanted them. Well, now they're $800-900. I don't get it.
Oh wow!
Yeah, it's ridiculous. I just bought one for $700, and I was kind of mad at myself for doing it, but I want to do a couple videos with it for the channel. But I'm just like, I used to sell these things. I used to buy these things for like $300 or $400 and flip them for like $600, and it was hard to get $600 out of them. So I don't know what's going on out there, but I guess
some of the prices of the new amps have really gone up, and maybe that's having some impact too, because I just looked at the reissue 2203, and I can't quote the price, but it was easily in the mid 2000s, like $24.99, something like that.
It doesn't make any sense. Did you look at the reissue JCM 900? How much those are? Because they make a reissue high gain dual reverb.
I saw that they made that, which I smiled when I saw that, but I didn't see the pricing.
Right. Like, why would they do that? But yeah, they're like the same price. They're like $2,300-$2,400 for a reissued JCM 900, the amp that nobody wanted, and they have them priced like that. And obviously, they're selling because they're still selling them.
I mean, I've got an original 1981, first year 2203 with the vertical inputs and 6550 tubes, and it's a beast. I love that amp. Mm-hmm. But I think it's probably worth, $1,800 maybe. Something like that. I haven't checked in a while.
1,800 to 2,000 is about going rate right now.
Yeah, I mean, less than the cost of the reissue. But I think what, people would, there is certainly a class of buyer that would feel more comfortable with something new, warranted, and no issue, that kind of thing, or no potential issue. Although these amps really can just go and go and go. I mean, you don't really have to do much to them. They're pretty basic circuits. So
no, you really don't. Yeah, so like you said, especially with the 800s, it's just a very basic. There's not much that can go wrong in them other than capacitors, transformers, and tubes. So yeah. they're kind of built to last, in that the simplicity is there.
Yeah. So I would always recommend someone to just buy an original one, get it serviced, maybe change the filter caps or the electrolytic the bias caps on the board, and make sure the tubes are good, and then you should be good to go for long time.
Probably quite a while, yeah. Especially because you can't crank them up anymore, so those tubes last you a good long time unless you're attenuating it. But so you worked kind of directly with Mike Soldano on the HotMod V2, right?
So what happened was when I had this idea of the HotMod V2, I knew that Mike hadn't been making these things for years, but I still wanted to reach out to him just out of respect, and also make sure that he wasn't planning to put one out in the market again.
Right.
So it started out with just permission, hey, would you mind if I did something like this? And he said, oh, that would be great. I think that's a great idea what you're doing. And then we just started chatting, and he gave me some input on the circuit, which actually there's a schematic going around on the web, or at least was at the time, that actually was incorrect on the HotMod. So he gave correct values, and then it kind of started from there. I also know Andy Marshall of THD Electronics. They're the makers of the Hot Plate, and he's a genius. And he and Mike are actually really good friends too, by the way.
Really?
And a little thing that I heard is fairly recently is that the 8-ohm Hot Plate that's done in purple is kind of an homage to Soldano.
That would make sense.
Our cabinets are 8 ohm, and so it's a hot plate, 8 ohm in that same sort of purple.
Yeah.
Anyway, so after I built after I basically cloned it, except I used 12AX7s, Andy Marshall was really helpful in helping me fine tune it. And originally, we had actually had plans to come out with this as a Soldano product, and it was going to be under the Soldano brand name.
Mm-hmm.
And Mike even went on, he even kind of teased the product on that Tone Talk, which is the video podcast on YouTube.
Oh, yeah. I've listened
with Dave Friedman and Mark Uzansky, and they're great guys. And Mike talked about it then, but the product wasn't quite ready. And before the product was ready, he semi-retired and sold to boutique amp distribution. So at that point, I came out with the HotMod V2 under my own brand. But originally it would have been a Soldano, which would have been kind of fun.
Yeah, that would.
Because I've always, like I said, it's one of my favorite all-time amps. And when I was a kid growing up, I couldn't afford an SLO, but that was the dream amp to have. In the 80s, it was like, wow, that is just
right.
So,
and it's
having that one cheaper.
Yeah, and you said yours is an actual Soldano, like with the DeYoung transformers. It's not a.
Yes,
that's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah, and it's in purple, and I've got a matching 2x12 cab for it, which I ended up buying directly from Mike. Awesome. Just to kind of complete the setup.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got the depth mod on it, but on this one it was installed on the back panel.
Okay.
And then it's got the Haynes mod, which is basically a bright switch, bright boost cut kind of thing. And then it's got the effects loop bypass switch, because a lot of people were
hated the effects loop. Yep.
Well, yeah, the effects loop was made for rack effects, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you bypass the effects loop, which is the same thing as some of those, the rectifiers. I have a Roadster, and when you bypass the effects loop on that, the amp sounds a lot better.
Yeah.
It really comes alive. It's a lot punchier. It's a great amp. So to me, the tone, the core tone of the distortion, as well as the clean, it's more important to have that than the quality of the effects. So when I was using my Roadster and gigging it, I had the effects, including time delay stuff, in the front of the amp.
Really?
Rather than putting it in the effects loop, which forced me to be, a delay in the front of an amp. It's really touchy, right? With the repeats, you have to really set the level low. Otherwise, it just goes like crazy. But I wasn't willing to sacrifice my core tone just so I'd have a better delay.
Yeah.
So I was happy with it.
True tone nerd right there.
Yeah.
You're like, nope, I won't do it. It's like an endless debate that rages on of where you should put your noise suppressor in your signal chain.
Right.
Yeah. All those little nuances everybody goes crazy over. So that's funny. Yeah. I remember, because I watched pretty much all the Tone Talk episodes, actually. I love learning about this stuff myself. But that's where I learned about the HotMod, actually. And I Googled it because Mike had talked about it, and he had talked about the original design. And then I saw yours, and it was literally like brand new at the time. I want to say it was 2018.
19. Yeah, 19.
Okay, yeah. I knew it was fairly recent, and I'm like, oh, that seems really cool, because I've had a 2203 reissue for quite a while, and I bought and sold a bunch of old 2203s. So that's honestly, that's how I heard about the HotMod in general. That's how I even knew about your product. So it's kind of cool that, because I do remember him kind of teasing it, and then it came out, but it came out under Legendary Tones, and I didn't know what the difference was. I didn't even really question it, why it wasn't Soldano at the time, but now I know why. So kind of cool to know the inside story on that. So what did I guess, like, how did Andy have a hand in it? What did he help you with exactly?
He helped me. So I consider myself, I won't say I'm an engineer. I'm kind of a guy that's likes to tweak with electronics, and I know enough to, I can service amps. I mean, tubes are not complicated. But when it came to, how do I get more treble, more bass? How can I increase the gain with less compression, because the original was really overly compressed? What are some of the values I should look at doing? And he would just kind of give me little recipes. at first he actually gave me a design that was completely different because he said, well, I think I've got a way I can do this that's even better. And I listened to it, and it was cool, but we ultimately went back to the original HotMod as sort of the template and went back to just changing out values. And that's the area where he's really knowledgeable. And then we also added a particular circuit, which the HotMod didn't have, which is one of the pins. It's the grid on the tube, and it's a grid to ground. And like, for example, on the Lynch Mod here, this one, you've got the knob on it. Mm-hmm. And the grid to ground is what basically controls the preamp gain.
Okay.
So there's two different ways that you can adjust the gain in a preamp tube. You can change the value of the plate and cathode resistors, and depending on those, you have different levels of gain. And I'll try not to nerd out too much on this, but one of the secrets of the Soldano SLO, well, not really a secret, is when people designed their amps, they would tend to go, well, what's the most amount of gain I can get off of each side of the 12AX7? And they would put in those plate and those cathode resistors and make it really hot. And that gives a really beefy, compressed kind of sound, and you're just really, really compressed. And they would do that over gain. What Mike did with his SLO, which was really revolutionary at the time, was he would take a tube gain stage and he would add more of them, but at lower values. So each one wasn't doing over compressed. And so that's how you get that note articulation. Mm-hmm. Without that over compressed kind of flubby sort of thing going on. So he did a completely different approach to design. It was, and I think he at one point even talked about it was kind of like tuning a car for performance. Like you can add more cylinders and keep them running cooler, rather than just supercharging and pumping up, a smaller cylinder design. It's sort of that kind of analogy.
Right.
So those type of things and thoughts went into the HotMod V2, and the grid to ground circuit, which is what Andy came back with, which isn't in the original. That one really helped stabilize the circuit as well. It dropped the noise, and it was really crucial and helpful to be able to fine tune exactly how much gain and what that gain would feel like. Because that's the thing you don't get on recordings necessarily. Like when you play, you can see how much gain you get, but then there's the feel of the note, mm-hmm. right? And that's really kind of an important sort of nuance. So if you want it to feel really compressed, you dial in a circuit a certain way. If you want it to be really articulate, you do it a different way. But you could still do it that way and have lots of gain.
Yeah.
It's just in how you
execute,
combine all your ingredients to put it all together. So Andy was super helpful at all of that. And then, I wanted to make sure I had someone that could look over and make sure I'm not doing anything dumb and making some mistakes.
Yeah.
I don't promise, I don't claim to know everything. And I think we're always learning. And unless you're Andy, I think he already pretty much knows everything.
He's got it all down, huh?
He's really smart.
That's awesome. I don't think I've ever seen him, like an interview with him or anything. Is he just?
Yeah, I mean, he came up in the mid '80s.
Okay.
And THD Electronics at that time, and he was building his own amps that were a lot based off of Fender circuits.
Okay.
And then he came out with one called the Univalve, which was kind of the precursor of the whole lunchbox amp craze now.
Yeah, I remember it being very popular, yeah.
Yeah, and you could put in whatever kind of tube you want. And so he's done a lot of innovative things. And then, of course, the hot plate, which really, to me, enabled sort of the new craze of being able to use old, Marshall Super leads and use them at reasonable volumes.
Again, without modification, no master volume modification.
Yeah, keep it without a master and just put an attenuator, a hot plate on it, and you're good.
Right.
My first product that I worked on was one with Robert Keeley back in 2001. The reason why I'm going to talk about this is because it's going to go back to the hot plate and actually famous guys. But it was this guy here, the Time Machine Boost.
Okay.
Which was the idea behind this one was to have, and this is for the Marshall guys. It had two different channels of gain, of boost. One would be a very like an old school Rangemaster treble booster, like Brian May or Black Sabbath, Tony Iommi would use to boost the front end. And I used that for kind of lead tones. And then the modern channel, so that was the past or the vintage side. And the modern channel was a very transparent, pure, clean boost. And I would use that for like a hotter rhythm kind of sound against a Marshall. So it essentially turned my single channel Marshall into, three sort of quasi channels. So that was a project I did with Robert back in 2001 when he was just kind of starting out.
When he was just starting out, you said? Yeah,
Robert Keeley. He was still building. I think he just was just starting to do mods to some Boss pedals.
Yeah,
and he had his compressor, which was a better clone of a Ross compressor, which was a revered kind of circuit.
Right.
And he found me because of Legendary Tones, because I wanted to create this thing. And I could kind of do a basic circuit, but I really wanted to work with a real engineer. And then he ended up writing to me and said, "Hey, I can help you with this." And then we collaborated on it, and it's, we've been like friends ever since. And
it's super cool.
Brothers, really. And in fact, the HotMod V2 Evo, it's his team that's doing the circuit board.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, cool. So we do the final assembly here.
Yeah.
But it's the Keeley Electronics team that's.
Yeah, I don't think we discussed that before. That's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So
cool. It's been fun, but so where does this go from the hot plate? Okay, so when we were talking about the hot plate and not being able to crank up our old amps, because of the Time Machine boost, Brad Whitford from Aerosmith, his guitar tech, had reached out to me and said, Brad's really interested in trying your Time Machine boost, and it's like, oh, no problem. So I sent him one to check out. And he really dug it. And then he invited me to their Aerosmith show locally. So I got to meet Brad, chat with him, and I got to watch Aerosmith from the side stage, which was just amazing because I've never been on a stage that big and be able to look out at the audience. So you get a little bit of a taste of, oh, that's what it would be kind of like.
Right, that'd be awesome.
But the funny thing is, here are these guys. These are, they've got their own sound crew. He was running several Marshall heads and several cabinets, but he had hot plates on top of them. Really? He was running them at -12 dB. So even the famous rock star, he could play at whatever volume he wants to, still was running an attenuator on his Marshall half stacks.
That's funny.
At a big outdoor show.
Yeah, so, exactly. He's like, all right, I got to keep it under control. My ears are getting old.
Yeah.
he probably blew himself away so many times at that point. I'm sure it didn't matter.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and before there were decibel meters, right, where you had to regulate the sound. Man. I can't even imagine how loud some of those concerts were in the 70s.
No.
Where it's like, it was all about the volume. Like, the louder you are, the better. And
right.
You hear these stories about The Who and all of these guys breaking the sound records for loudest concert.
Right. I remember my dad, he's a huge AC/DC fan, and he always said he saw him. We used to actually have a place for bands to come through here in Erie, and I think he said he saw them 2 or 3 times, like really before they broke real big. And he was like, man, those were the loudest concerts I'd ever been to by far. Like, you couldn't even hear for days. He would say it like he was proud of it, like you couldn't hear for days after those concerts.
Yeah, and I think it was pretty much all of them were like that, because my first concert, I think, was right around 1980, and so volume was still ridiculous then. And that first concert was just Pat Benatar, who's just, she's just classic rock singer, great guitar player in the band, but they were freaking loud. And you don't normally think of that kind of music as loud, but, when I saw Metallica many years later opening up for Ozzy, on the Master of Puppets tour, that was not as loud as Pat Benatar, who's, just playing her pop-friendly songs.
So they had already started to dial it back at that point.
Yeah, they did. An amazing show, by the way. Metallica with Cliff Burton right before he passed. It was just, and I love Ozzy, but that night it was all about Metallica for me. I mean, they were just at their that was their pinnacle.
Yeah, they were at their peak. That's their best album in my personal opinion. So you got to see him at just the right time with Cliff. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I remember, because I always used to watch like Behind the Music on VH1. Like the reason I asked you about the history of stuff is I'm the same way. I love to know anything I'm into. I like to know the history of it. I don't know why.
Yeah.
My girlfriend makes fun of me because I'm on a kick where I've been like listening to like vintage video game podcasts or like
nice.
So like we went down a rabbit hole the other night on the Sega on Sonic games, like watching videos of people play them and just like remembering them from our childhood. And now for 2 weeks I've been like, every night I'll go to bed and listen to the history of how this system came in development and came on the market and how it died. So I was just curious because I'm like, I don't meet a lot of other people like that who actually care about the history of things, how they started. And I always find it interesting. It seems like the history of most things are like happy accident type things.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of that. I know that I've read a story about the Proco Rat. Its particular distortion characteristic was an accident, like they reversed one of the parts in the circuit. And I won't talk a lot about video games, but you just brought back fond memories. Okay. When I was a kid, I used to, this is when you would hook up all your video games through your antenna, your UHF or VHF antenna system. And I had linked them in parallel. I had the Atari, the Sega Genesis, before the PlayStation, the Nintendo 64, all that stuff. And they were all linked, and it was fun. I still have my Super Nintendo too.
That's awesome.
It's in my daughter's room. And it still works.
I was going to say, for some reason, the Super Nintendo is like the one that works forever no matter what. It's weird.
You don't have to blow on the cartridges like the early...
Yeah.
And you know what? The whole thing with blowing on the cartridges, you had to do that even when they were brand new. It wasn't when they were, they got old and now they don't work. No, even when they were brand new, they would be real finicky.
Right. I remember.
You mentioned Sonic. I don't know if you got a Game Gear. Do you remember that little?
I remember them. I never had one. We were too broke to afford a Game Gear and a Genesis.
That thing was pretty amazing. I mean, if you compare that to a Game Boy, it was just leaps and bounds beyond. And how it never, I don't know why it never really picked up as well as it should have compared to a Game Boy. Maybe it was the price.
I was going to say.
I don't know.
Yeah, but, I think I watched an episode on the Game Gear itself, and one of the things was it was just too expensive for most people to want to spend the money on. But yeah, you're right. I remember playing, like you said, at the same time, I had a gray Game Boy, like the original big fat Game Boy, and then the Game Gear, which was also huge, but the graphics on it were incredible. I think I had like an X-Men game at the time that my buddy, he would let me borrow it. I lived in a trailer park and he lived 2 trailers down. He'd let me borrow his Game Gear sometimes. So yeah, it's pretty funny that you bring that up. So I guess I had a question for you and I just lost it. I'm tired right now. If you can't tell, I'm usually in bed in like 20 minutes at this point.
All right. Well, we can wrap up whenever you'd like.
No, it's all good. I tend to lose my train of thought when I get tired, but so the HotMod, like the switches, when did you add those? And I think the question that I originally had was, how did you end up getting hooked up with George Lynch and doing a Lynch model? That was my main question.
Oh, okay. So yeah, we could talk about the Lynch thing first. So it's kind of a funny story with him, or not maybe funny, but interesting. I've got my day job career where I work in PR and marketing, and part of that job in the past has been at one particular job, I worked at Seagate, which is a hard drive company, and I would work with video producers or directors or musicians, all sorts of folks who would want hard drives for their studios. And we would send them hard drives in exchange for maybe working on them with a case study or doing an endorsement deal, those kind of things. So it's sort of that kind of artist relation sort of deal. And so George Lynch was one who contacted me at Seagate and was interested in hard drives. And I was blown away when I first got on the phone. I'm like,
yeah,
I used to read about this guy in all the guitar magazines. I mean, he was like, I mean, there's Eddie and there's George, and I mean, he's wow.
He's a big deal, right?
Really big deal. And so, we ended up chatting about 10 minutes on what hard drives he needed. And then for another 45 minutes after that, or maybe even longer, we just started talking about gear and tone and guitar. And, he's just, even though he's been in the industry all this time, he's always on a tone chase. And he's one of those guys, again, where I talked about flavors of ice cream. He doesn't just go after one tone.
Mm-hmm.
He loves all sorts of different tones and having different varieties of gear to use. And so we started talking about old Marshalls, and I had a 72 Super Lead, and I knew he had another one earlier that he had borrowed on some of his early, Dokken records. So I shipped him out that to check out, and we just became friends. And so back then I had the Time Machine Boost also. So I sent him the Time Machine Boost, and he's like, oh, let's, this is really cool. Let's do maybe a George Lynch version and add some more stuff and tweak it. So we ended up doing a George Lynch Time Machine Boost back in 2003 or 4.
Oh, that's cool. Okay.
And I did a NAMM, and then we met and in person, and he demoed it at the NAMM show with Keeley and myself there. And it was a lot of fun. And then fast forward to 2019, I put out the HotMod V2, and I reached out to him and said, hey, you remember that old Soldano HotMod? He's like, yeah, they were all right. I didn't really dig them because, for all the same reasons, right? They were noisy, too much low end. And I'm like, well, I did one where I tuned it differently. You want to check it out and just see what you think. And he checked it out. He's like, yeah, this thing sounds really cool. And then the same thing, hey, you want to do a special one where we maybe do some things? And I said, yeah, let me, so we chatted for a bit about what he liked and wanted to do. And so I built him a couple prototypes, and one of them had a bass switch on it, add more bass or cut bass, and then I had the gain knob instead of a switch, and that's the one that he picked. And then we started putting those in production, and just in limited numbers, because these are they're hand wired, they're very labor intensive. I enjoy doing them, but I can't see myself doing them forever and sitting and because I still got a day job, and clock ends at 5 p.m. and then I basically eat some food, and I go to the left side of my table here and I start soldering. And that actually worked pretty well during all this COVID stuff.
Oh yeah.
But now that we're coming out of it and my band is starting to rehearse, I actually am looking forward to playing music more.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've got a few more of this third batch of Lynch units, and then we'll probably take a break for a while and then talk with George about, maybe we do them in the future. So I could just focus on the Evos, and I've got some other product ideas as well. But George has just been a longtime friend, and we love chatting gear, and, we talk a couple times a year about whatever, and great guy. And, it's been fun. But as far as your second question, which was about the switches, it's interesting because even though the Soldano HotMod had a lot of bass, and I did tune out some of the bass on the early versions of the HotMod, to some people, they still wanted more of a cut. And so that was just getting some of the feedback from customers, like, it'd be great to have less bass. And so there are a few people where, I'm all about customer service, and just, I want someone to be happy with what they've got from me. And so I had a few people send their units back, and I'm like, I'll add another switch to it, and that'll drop the bass down even further, and see what you think. And then people love that. And actually, Jason Frankenhauser, who I think he was one of the guys that was really big on. He was one of the first guys that sort of mentioned that too much bass and it's a little bit muddy. And, so I took in his feedback as well. There are a few others that had similar feedback, and it's all depends on, people's style and what they like to play.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to have the switch on there because there's some people that want to have it really tight. And then there's other people that, maybe their Marshall's a little bit thin and they want it to fill up a little bit and be a little bit bigger. So the bass boost there. The gain switch was something, when I first came out with the HotMod, there weren't any switches on it.
Right.
And I dialed the gain to where I thought it was best. And if you take a Lynch mod and you put it at about, 1 o'clock, somewhere around there, that's basically where the original HotMod gain was at.
Okay.
So that's the same as now you've got the Evo. The low position is about equal to that.
Okay.
That's, to my ears, what I like. But then there are some other people that were like, I want a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, okay, well, let me dial it up. So that was the first bit of feedback was, let me dial it up and let me add the gain switch. So I started doing that. And then Jason and others, came to me and, I'd like the bass to be dropped down a little bit. And then the bass switch. So I imagine if I start to get a lot more feedback about something else, maybe there'll be some more switches or some more features. But I think what I've been able to do is, with the customer feedback that's come in, is really dial in something that is useful for a lot of people and for a reasonable price. I didn't want to go into that. I spent those early HotMods are hand wired, but I did not want to charge a real premium for that. I didn't want to, say, oh, this is $400 or something like that.
Right.
So I thought the $199, $200 price mark was about where I could have it to where it would be a reasonable cost for folks to have and enjoy. And, it's basically like what a boutique pedal would kind of cost.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, maybe some would cost even more. I don't know. There's so many pedals out there.
Yeah.
But even the cost of the tubes, those are going up now. So, but I'm still trying to keep the price down. That's my thing, and keep it at $199 as long as I can for folks. But so that's the story on the switches. Just continued feedback. I've got my set of ears, but then the customers, they've got their set of ears, and you want to try to make it good for as many people as you can so that they enjoy it. And that's kind of the bottom line with those.
Right. And that's great, because one of the arguments I've kind of been encountering in like gear groups and stuff like that a lot lately is when you're buying a certain brand, especially like the boutique brands like Friedman and Wagner, you're kind of buying an amp that's tuned to that amp maker's ear, I guess is the argument that people are making. So, and I believe it because every Friedman amp has a character. Every Dietzel amp has a character. Every Wagner, like, it doesn't matter how different the design, there's inherent things in those amps that are always there. So the fact that you're making your own product, but listening to the customer's wants and needs, and not only that, but kind of making it so they have options to go from one to the other. Because I will say personally, on both my V2 and my Evo, there's a substantial gain difference with the switch on versus off, and that gain and compression also brings a little bit of a voicing change. It kind of shifts the mids lower, it seems, and I'm guessing that's the compression. But just to have those options, you get two different sounds out of it, depending, or really three different sounds depending the way that you have the gain or the switches positioned. But that's great. There's such a thing as option paralysis, but like you said, there's so many differences in old Marshalls. I've had some that are really bassy and flubby, and if I had that amp, I wouldn't want to engage that bass switch. My current ones have plenty of low end, so I don't have to engage that bass switch. And it, like you said, it kind of makes it universal across no matter which Marshall you have, because they're so inconsistent. It's going to work. So I think that's great on you for listening to the feedback and making the changes and making it a more usable product.
Yeah, and it's also the ingredients that you use. If you hit it with a really high output pickup that's passive, that's running 16, 18K or DC resistance, that's going to put a lot of low end.
Yeah.
If you've got EL34s versus 6550s, that's going to be different. So, there's just a myriad amount of combinations of tones. So you do the best you can. I had one guy that loves to play with different tubes. And he said, well, I like putting a 12AU7 in the first slot of the HotMod. And I'm like, that's kind of weird. But he does it because he finds he gets all the gain that he wants out of it still. I mean, 12AU7 is a lower gain version of a 12AX7, right?
Very low.
12AT, very low.
40% of a 12AX7?
Yeah, something in there. And there's a 12AT7, which is about 70%.
Right.
But he likes it because he likes the tone when he dials back the volume on his guitar and rolls it off. And then he can roll it up and he's got the gain he wants. So, I'm glad that he found what works for him. I don't plan on coming out with these stock with 12AU7s.
Oh, please don't.
I want to get the most amount of gain as possible.
Right.
And, but, everyone's got a different ear and different taste. And it's fun. And that's, I think, one of the other things I really enjoy with this is actually, people go, oh, you're so good with customer service and blah, 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 blah. I enjoy chatting with people, and I like when people reach out to me. It's part of the fun. If they've got a challenge or if they've got to figure out a problem, then we figure it out and we're able to solve it. Great. Or if they're just singing praises, that's great too.
Right.
But that's even when I had the blog and I wasn't selling anything, it was just information. I always enjoyed connecting with people and having people reach out and talk about whether they want to talk about Van Halen tone or David Gilmour tone or Marshall amps or whatever.
Right.
I enjoyed that. It's one of the good things about the internet, right? It's kind of made the world smaller. We can kind of communicate with so many.
Right. So, absolutely. Yeah. This relationship here would never exist without that.
Right.
Yeah. Speaking of your customer service, the way that I met David, for everybody listening, is I bought a used HotMod locally. I found a good price on it and I posted a picture in a gear group. And it turned out the one that I bought was, I believe, the original version that you had put out before you had tweaked anything. And I just posted a picture casually, and said, hey, check it out. I'm going to check this out soon. And you messaged me and said, hey, I've done some updates. I'd love to update that for you if you want to send it out to me. And that's basically how this whole relationship started. So it's kind of funny. Like, I didn't want to buy it at first. No offense to you, just because I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to like it. I don't know if I don't like it, how hard it's going to be to resell. So I literally, it sat in my local music shop for a week behind a glass door that nobody could get to. And I'm sure most people didn't know what it was. Finally, I'm like, screw it. I'm going to go buy that thing. And like I said, those everything happens by this odd chance. But yeah, your customer service has been nothing short of phenomenal. So I appreciate that. And I know a lot of other people do as well, because I've had people who watch my channel hit me up and also say, hey, I learned about the HotMod from your video and I messaged David and he helped me out with some stuff. I think some guy told me you even helped him out with something completely unrelated from the HotMod. So that just shows that you're...
Oh, yeah. A guy had an issue with his amp and his tech couldn't look at his amp for like 2-3 months. And I said, well, just ship it to me. I know there's a charge to it, but I'll take a look at your amp, no problem. And it turned out to be a real easy fix.
Yeah.
But he wasn't basically he bought a Lynch Mod and he wasn't able to enjoy it because he had an issue with his amp. So I'm like, well, I want to take care of your amp then. So I'm not saying, hey, everybody send me your amps.
No, but, not commercial for that, for sure. You got your hands full already.
It's one of those things. So, and to your story too, I wasn't doing it also because, you do a video review kind of thing. I've gone on Reverb and I've looked at sold units and I've reached out to customers that have had old, that may not have even bought it from me. Like they're buying it second hand. And I reach out to them and say, hey, I know you've got the original circuit. I've updated it to where it can have more compatibility in other amps, including the SC20. If you want me to do it, just, pay for shipping and send it to me and I'll upgrade it. And they're like, really? Yeah, because
you don't want any money for this? What the hell are you reaching out to me for?
One, I didn't make so many of them, so it's not like I got to upgrade, a million of these things.
Right.
But I just want the best version of my product out there
at all times,
to represent what the thing is. So, it's just kind of how I'm wired, and it's not wired about money. Because if it was wired about money, it'd be like, hey, this thing's going to sound awesome in your Fender Twin. Just believe me.
Right. Or just some ridiculous marketing in general. Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
you definitely don't go for that. So yeah, that's commendable, man. I appreciate you reaching out to me, and I appreciate, everything you've done for me so far. It's been great. The HotMod Evo, I know I've told you a couple times, but I'm absolutely loving that thing. That has turned my 2203 into one of my favorite amps. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
Glad to hear it.
You have how many of those left from the first run?
What do you mean, like how many left?
Well, you've sold a whole bunch of them already, haven't you?
Oh, the Evos?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, those are in continuous production. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah. So I make, I'm a small company here, so I make them in batches of 100 at a time.
Okay.
Right, because you got to buy 100 cases, you got to buy 200 tubes. It adds up pretty quick.
Oh, I'm sure.
When I look at my spreadsheet of materials cost over a quarter, because I have to pay taxes quarterly, it's like, wow, I spent that much on
right.
stuff to build things, and and labor and all that. So I do them in batches of 100, and so we've I think it was March 8th when I made the official announcement. Now we're end of April, and we've almost sold 200
That's
of
awesome.
just the Evo. So, we're kind of on, 100 a month. So for a small business, it's pretty cool, that people are enjoying it. And I haven't really even pushed on the, the marketing or PR side of it too much. I'm going to. I'm actually going to. No worries. I'm actually planning some ads in Premier Guitar and Vintage Guitar magazine, small ones here and there. But I didn't do that for that first year when I was hand wiring them. One, because hand wiring them takes so much time, and I was basically selling every one I was making.
Yeah.
And two, is I wanted some time for it to be in the field, because I knew what I liked, but I wanted to get that customer feedback.
Right.
And so those original ones, like what you bought, they actually cost more than the Evo did.
Okay.
Those originally brand new were $249.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to bring the Evo out to $199 because it's on a circuit board. Now, it's a very high grade circuit board. It's extra thick. It's thicker than what it needs to be. All the components are, there's nothing surface mount, and still made in the US and all of that here. No robot manufacturing. But we were able to bring the price down, which I was really happy to do.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And the fact that you did pass that on to people, you could have very well sold them at the same price and just bumped your production up. So,
yeah, I could have done that, but I think $199 is kind of fair all the way around. And
yeah,
nobody gets into this particular business because they're like, I want to get rich.
Yeah,
I'll go. I want to be an amp builder. To get rich. No, you're not going to do that, or build pedals. You're going to go sell real estate, or you're going to play with stocks, or
right.
Maybe you're going to buy Bitcoin in 2017, which I should have held on to because now it's ridiculous.
Whoops.
You do it because you're passionate about it and because you want to contribute something and help out other people with their tone and give them something unique and different. And so I've got some other things in the works, and all I can say on that is they will be anything that I put out. I think people will enjoy, but they will all have a different kind of twist. Like, it's not going to be an overdrive pedal. Just not interested in coming out with one of those.
I would buy it.
Well, I can't even tell you if it would sound good. I mean, I don't even know. The problem with overdrive pedals, or pedals in general, is you've got an even greater variance of what that can sound like. Like,
right.
If you take, for example, I don't know if you've played the old, and like any sort of blackface Fender amp, like a Pro or a Twin, they've got a bright switch on it.
Mm-hmm.
And you turn the bright switch off and you put on a, whatever distortion pedal, and it can sound really good. And you flip the bright switch on, and that distortion pedal, I mean, it goes mega bright.
Yeah.
It's just, and some amps are naturally tuned that way, and they don't even give you the option of a bright switch. So, it's tough because I have that thing where I want everyone to be happy with whatever product I have that I put out there, and I want it to sound good. But you make an overdrive pedal, and they're not going to sound good in every configuration. No. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
So if I did an overdrive pedal, I would probably do it the same way as the HotMod, where I'd go, this will work really well in a Fender type circuit, but not in this. Don't buy it for this. And I'm just being more honest, which is maybe not a typical marketing thing. You normally want to cast a wide net.
Right, exactly.
It's just how I'm wired. So,
yeah, there's nothing wrong with integrity, man. Nothing at all. It's appreciated. So, yeah. Where can people buy these? Where can people buy the new Evo?
LegendaryTones.com is the site for the blog, as well as information on the Evo and the Lynch Mod. But we actually have our first dealer as well, Motor City Guitar, and they're in Detroit, Michigan area. And so if anyone lives in that area and wants to check one out in person, or if they have stock, which they do currently, I think, they can get it without the wait. Because typically when someone orders a unit from me, it's, it could be 2 weeks to 4 weeks, depending. Right now I'm at a 2 to 3 week waiting period before I can deliver orders. So Motor City Guitar is great to check out first. Marty, the owner, is fantastic and has been real supportive. And he used to carry the Soldano HotMod way back in the day.
Oh, so wow, really?
So he reached out to me. I wasn't soliciting for dealers because, I'm pretty low production.
Yeah.
So, but he said, yeah, I used to carry the Soldano HotMod. I'd love to carry, yours again. It looks like it's got all kinds of great reviews and people are enjoying it. So, so I started selling them to him, and so far so good. He's selling them off as well. We've already got our second order that just came in a couple days ago from
awesome.
We've got to fill. So
very cool. Yeah, like I said, man, I think once the world kind of catches on to these, especially just because most people don't have access to a good tube amp tech these days. They're getting pretty hard to come by. So just the fact that there's a plug and play hot rod mod for a Marshall that you can buy for a reasonable price and not alter your amp and not have to have a tech do the work for you is awesome. So I think the product's a great idea, man, and the execution on your end is fantastic. Again, I promise everybody I'm not trying to do a commercial for David. He's not paying me to do this, but I really do believe in his product. I think it's a fantastic product. So I think you got a winner, man.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. I appreciate your time, man. I'm going to wrap this up because I'm falling asleep in my chair, even though I am very interested in the conversation. But yeah, thanks for everything, David. I appreciate it. Everybody go check out legendarytones.com. If you have an 800, you're probably going to want to pick up one of these Evos. Trust me, they sound fantastic. And yeah, thanks again for coming on, man.
Oh, thanks for having me.
All right. Take care, David.
All right. Take care. Bye.